Good afternoon. I'm Susanna Greaves. I'm a director at White Cube. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us wherever you are for what promises to be a fascinating conversation between Julie Curtis and Mary Wilde. It's taking place to coincide with Julie's exhibition Monads and Dyads, which opened on the 14th of May at White Cube Masons Yard and runs until the 26th of June. We were fortunate to show Julie's work in 2017 at White Cube Bermondsey as part of the exhibition Dreamers Awake, but this is her first solo show in London and in fact in Europe, and it's accompanied by the first comprehensive monograph. Julie's work is celebrated for its distinctive visual style, which draws on many diverse languages of figuration, from art history to popular culture, and for her arresting dreamlike images, often infused with a dark humor or an erotic charge. Her work has a cinematic quality in its cropping and framing and in the suggestion of a continuing narrative. And she counts a number of filmmakers as important influences. She encountered Jungian thought early in her art education, and this too has had a profound influence on her image making. Mary Wilde is a film theorist with a particular focus on Freudian and Lacanian psychoanalysis. She produces the Projections program of film lectures at the Freud Museum in London, and also hosts a podcast by the same name with Sarah Cleaver. Julie and Mary began a conversation in the final stages of preparation for this show, which continued while Julie was with us in London. They've shared their converging psychoanalytic interests as a way to explore some of the themes of Julie's paintings, as well as exchanging cinematic references. With Julie now back in New York, we're so pleased that this dialogue is able to continue and that they've agreed to share it with us. And we're also inviting you to join the conversation by typing your questions into chat or into the Q&A, I beg your pardon, as we go along. And Mary and Julie will answer a selection of at the end of the conversation. But I know you have a lot to talk about, so over to you, Mary and Julie.
Thank you so much, Susanna. Thank you also to Cecily Bates for making this event possible. I'm just going to share my document. Hopefully you can see that. Thank you to Cecily Bates, to the White Cube Gallery, and to you, Julie, for taking on this project with me and engaging in this conversation, which I've really enjoyed. I've loved exploring your work. And in fact, I have to say that your exhibition at the White Cube, Monads and Dyads, was the first post-COVID event I attended, fresh out of lockdown here in London. So you really set the bar very high for me. I really enjoyed my experience, and I hope it sets the tone for the post-COVID era for me.
Wow. For the honor.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be joined again with you via Zoom. And I wanted to really kick things off in our conversation today by asking you, what role does cinema play in your artistic process?
Yes. You know, it's funny because I don't think you really had much to do, even though I've always been really, loving cinema, and it's always been in my mind, but it started to be more relevant in my process, I think in 2015, after watching at home with my husband, Clinton King, watching a series of, doing a Hitchcock movie cycle. And that really kind of really stimulated some new ideas. I think what happened is that I start to frame and use those really interesting cinematic language, like the framing, the cropping of the image, start to integrate that to the image making. I think a lot of my subjects were in the continuation of the traditional, painting, but introducing a different kind of framing that belonged more to the cinema world was great, because it, in a way, it was asking from the audience to complete the narrative around my work, because I was living so much outside of the image. The audience had to kind of use their own imagination to fill the blanks. So I'd say that was the most important thing. Also, what I did then is that I started to work on at a much smaller scale and really reduce a lot of my vocabulary. And I used these more like tropes that you find in cinema a lot in Hollywood, and used, like, for instance, long manicured hands and cigarette smoke and a lot of things that, you know, belonged a lot to the movie tradition, and especially 1960s or 50s or 70s, and use that in the, you know, use those tropes in my image making.
Fantastic. No, I completely understand what you were explaining about that kind of element in cinema that activates the fantasy life of the viewer. And it kind of compels us as a spectator to merge together with that art form and really kind of have this weird, this very peculiar dynamic with it. And I feel like your paintings really do that. They do have that kind of strong cinematic quality. But I also wondered, would you consider yourself a psychoanalytically minded artist? Because as you know, my work is very much at the intersection of psychoanalysis and cinema. And I wondered, how much does psychoanalysis as a theoretical framework figure in your practice as an artist?
Yes, no, totally. I think it's, so you come from the, you know, I think we talked about it, and you come from the Freudian world. And I guess my entry into psychology was more through the Jungian lenses, who like collaborated together. So there's a lot of overlaps, and obviously Jung, you know, Freud was a bit the parental figure of Jung for a while, and then he rebelled against Freud. But for me, yes, I've done, you know, I started therapy fairly early when I was 15 years old, and I suspect my therapist was more Lacanian. But then that's in combination to going to art school, to Beaux-Arts in Paris, where there was a class of, you know, called psychoanalysis of art, and the class was led by the person who was leading the Carnet Jungien de la psychologie. So it was like a Jungian psychoanalyst, and that was extremely important in, you know, in my own personal development, but also in the development of my artistic practice. I think I've always used art a little bit as a, you know, in a therapeutic context, artistic context, but also I've always used it to channel a lot of my own anxiety. So there was that. And also once I moved in New York, I actually started therapy again at the Jungian Institute. So, so Jung always like provided a kind of, you know, lenses, or a form of, not template, but I'd say more like his concepts are pretty, you know, pretty open, and really help me to see patterns emerge, whether they're personal patterns or whether they're more like societal or historical or, you know, cultural patterns.
Yeah. Archetypes.
So the archetypes, and, you know, it's a concept that Jung really developed.
Yes.
And basically what's really interesting about a Jungian, and that maybe Jung, and that distinguish him from, you know, even more from other psychoanalysts, is that he's extremely visual. Yes. And well, a lot of psychoanalysts are really, you know, more interested in the verb of language, like Lacan. He's more, is really, is thinking about thoughts or concepts, but with an image, which archetypes are basically. And actually he was an artist himself. He had like an artistic practice. So he knew quite a bit about, you know, the flow, and really what it takes to be really instinctual in the way you apprehend concept and thoughts, and, you know. But I think what was like, and I can finish with that, but like, I think what really attracted to me at first is that, you know, I'm half Vietnamese and half French, and he introduced to me the concept of collective and conscious. And I think that really resonated a lot with me, because when I was teenager or young adult, I think I carried a lot about my parents, or especially my dad's past trauma, was, living in a country that has war. And so Jung and his idea of collective unconscious and things being passed down generations was really appealing to me, which is again about making patterns emerge from things, and that's why so much of my work is about that kind of pattern recognition and working around those patterns.
That's fantastic. I mean, it must be so fascinating to be able to use the artistic medium as that process to work through, certain feelings or historical events in your personal life, or just, perceptions of the world. And in the clinical setting, this would be done verbally exclusively, but of course in the artistic practice, you have the kind of wonderful opportunity to visually represent these things. So I just want to move on to really the first segment of our talk, and this will follow as a pattern. I will just talk very briefly about some top line theoretical concepts, and then connect them to your paintings, the ones that we selected. I want to start off with the death drive, which is a classically very Freudian idea, and it connects with the impulse to engage in risky or life-ruining acts like thrill-seeking. Thrill-seeking is an extreme case of that, but it could also be like stagnation as well. It sort of goes in extremes. But importantly, whatever death drive impulse is being manifested, it prevents the person from making difficult decisions in their current life. So it actually serves to evade the anxiety related to, the impulses of life, such as having to confront aggressive impulses or confront trauma directly. It's like a very convenient buffer zone. That's the death drive. Actually, Slavoj Žižek talks about it as being, the undead eternal life itself, the horrible fate of being caught in the endless repetitive cycle of wandering around in guilt and pain. So this connects me to, we spoke a lot about your paintings and what they might connect to theoretically and cinematically. And I think that your paintings, Cells and Airplane, really remind me of the Freudian death drive. They capture that kind of state of mind that I noticed very prevalent during the COVID pandemic. That kind of deficit of vitality, of eros, the desire to live and be productive. And you had mentioned that Gattaca as a film touches something close to this. So tell me more about it. As you speak, I will show both paintings, Cells and Airplane. I'd love to hear from you.
Okay. Yes. I think we talked about what initially prompted the paintings, especially Cells. And then I talked about the pandemic and how it really influenced my later body of work, and how it came a bit in that continuation and within the theme of monads and dyads, how I had started off with dyads like paintings describing opposite tensions, opposite forces. And then coming back to pre that duality, like the monocell kind of concepts. And so that's where all the Tondo paintings were made, which is strange because it was at the end of the show, but a bit, I think in a way, was me processing the pandemic era. And so the Tondo shape paintings a bit for me referred to, especially that one, to this idea of isolation we all went through, and atomization of society, where suddenly we were kind of isolated from one another, and this impossibility of communicating directly or meet people or meet the members of your family or your friends, and only being able to kind of interact with one another through a device. And so I was really thinking about that general tendency when I worked on that painting. The kind of special kind of point of view I used here is actually looking back with an older body of work of mine that I started in when I was 20 years old. I was painting a lot of characters seen from well above or from my own point of view. And so in a way, it was really kind of personal for me to look back with a much older body of work, and but with this kind of new element to it. And in a way, this, I think in this painting sells us a bit like the, the panopticon kind of concept or like, the surveillance, the idea of surveillance of these new things that are becoming way more prominent in our lives, way more real. And I think it was a bit about that, cells as of, isolation, or cells as of monocellular kind of, organism. So the plain painting, was pre-pandemic, but in a way it took an interesting meaning when, I painted it during the pandemic, with the idea of, safety, of control, of, adverse events. I mean, obviously the composition was inspired from the pamphlet you find on planes, these hilarious pamphlet where you see like, yeah, sure, that's never going to happen this way. So a bit this tension of like kind of knowing that would be, the idea of like basically organized chaos, or like, and also the tension between our like primal urges of, of survival.
Oh, yes.
And at the same time, the rationalization of that, so this double tension, because when you think about flying, there's nothing normal about flying for a human being or for an animal, we're animals. So this kind of panic is so this tension between like the primal panic and the rationalization of that, and the idea of safety and security, I think to me relate a bit to that death drive kind of concept in a very strange way.
Definitely. I mean, I'm going to show the clip now from Gattaca, but I want to kind of encourage the participants today to bear in mind that this idea of atomization, and also the kind of paradoxical state of being in a crashing aircraft while also being told to kind of live a well-balanced life. I mean, those kinds of very strange, like clashing ideas together, pitted together, I feel are very present in the film Gattaca, directed by Andrew Niccol. So I'm just going to play this very brief scene here from the film.
God, how many times have I told Cavendish? Oh, well, this can't have been open more than 5 minutes ago. A wine like this needs to breathe. Remember that.
You know, they say when you're weightless, it's the closest thing to being in the womb.
I can't believe you pulled this off. They're sending you up there. Up there, for Christ's sake, you of all people.
But I hate to think of you alone in that room for a year.
Well, don't think about it. Anyway, the room I'm stuck in is bigger than your tin cans.
You know what I'm saying. What are you gonna do?
I have my books. I go places in my head.
I'd be happier if you had some company.
I have visitors.
Yeah, well, none that you don't pay.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
Seriously. What are you gonna do?
I'm gonna finish this. What's Titan like this time of year?
What's Titan like? Titan is exactly like this. All the time. It's got a cloud around it so thick nobody can tell what's underneath.
Maybe there's nothing there.
There's something there.
Yeah, I mean, Julie, this was your selection, and it completely blew me away. It's such a great scene, and I can't help but think, obviously this film being about a genetically inferior man, in scare quotes, inferior man, who always aspired to travel in space and then assumes the identity of a paraplegic in order to accomplish his goal. And he himself feels very atomized and isolated in the system that he's in. And the wonderful symbol here of breathing smoke, thick smoke, into this half full glass of wine is the perfect metaphor for me of the death drive, because the nothingness of the smoke sits so perfectly with the wine, which Jude Law's character said, you have to leave the bottle out so that it can breathe, so that the liquid of the wine is like the breath of life, eros, but it always coexists so perfectly alongside death. And that is the death drive, is the dual impulses.
Wow, that's amazing. Wow, I didn't even think about the wine part. You have to bottle out to let breathe. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's such a wonderful film, and I think it sits very neatly with the paintings that you talked about. I want to kind of move us along into the conversation, just because time is of the essence.
Damn it. Okay, I feel like we didn't really get into this. Okay,
unless you had something else to say quickly about Gattaca, please feel free.
Well, yeah, I think maybe I didn't really talk really clearly about it before, but just wanted to say very quickly, like when you told me about the death drive, I didn't know about this, basically the life drive, which would be Eros, and then the death drive, which would be Thanatos, and how these two characters in the movie really embody these two tendencies, and how basically Ethan Hawke was like a child of love, because he's actually born from natural lovemaking, is an invalid, but somehow he's because he's confronted his death, can kind of always outperform himself and go further. Like he's not scared anymore, in a way. He's not paralyzed by fear. And while Jude Law was basically a child, genetically conceived,
yes.
Artificially conceived child, it's so perfect. He's already in like what we'd say a deadly perfection, basically, and it's hard for him to strive to get better because he's already achieved it when he was born. So I thought those two, one is very was born out of a society of control, and the other one still with a lot of imperfection and creative in that imperfection, and those two dual forces were really interesting for me in the movie.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, everything you just said, I feel is very, I can recognize it in your paintings, having seen your exhibition. This kind of, this very kind of delicate balance of those two forces, kind of like bubbling away beneath the kind of visual kind of impact of your paintings. And it's very strong, and I do appreciate what you said there. Just kind of moving on to the second segment in our talk, I just wanted to share a couple of top line ideas connected to oral fixation, which was the second concept that we agreed to be discussed today. This is known to be caused by unmet oral needs or thwarted appetite in childhood that leads to anxiety or neurosis in adulthood, according to psychoanalysts. But importantly, it can be caused by not just neglect, which is insufficient feeding, but also overprotection, so overfeeding. So kind of an imbalance on either side of the spectrum would lead the child to grow up and possibly become an orally fixated adult. And this is important also when we think of jouissance, the excessive pleasure that is linked to the division of this and splitting of the subject, the painful principle of having too much, and I feel like this is very present in the painting that we're going to be talking about, but also in a lot of other of your paintings. This excessiveness, this something that potentially might overflow is present. And of course, oral fixation is linked to the paradox of food presenting both nurturing and destructive functions and dimensions. And I wanted to kind of turn to this piece in the exhibition, Kitchen Counter, which aligns with the so-called oral fixation, signaling a nurturing quality, but also a primal excess inside the home about something that's maybe more threatening. And we thought that paired very well for with the discreet charm of the bourgeoisie. So I'll leave the floor open to you to say your thoughts about this.
Okay, my connection is not very good. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So yes, in my paintings, there's so much food in my painting, and it's food. You know, I like to work on that kind of duality of attraction, repulsion, and I think that has to do with this this thing about the ambivalence of food itself, nurturing and destructive, as you know, in the same place. And that's why I love the movie, I think, because I'm also into those opposition and tension of high and low, you know, the oral fixation and the anal fixation. I feel like for me, they're like both into the same like complex within the same painting. And the bourgeois kind of exemplifies that in a movie of Buñuel, where the bourgeois has this like kind of, it has so much meaning, it has so much like, so much food, the bourgeois has access to so much wealth, but at the same time, he is always in that kind of tension where he cannot never like kind of yield to his basest or most primal desires. And I think that's what's funny about Buñuel, because in a way, during the whole movie, they're trying to have dinner, they're making dinner plans, and it keeps being interrupted. And so their desire, their primal needs keep being frustrated. And I think that's what the bourgeois exemplifies, all, you know, this sophistication and this people being really cultivated, and my cat disrupting the talk, of course.
The cat right. Overflowing into the space. Yeah,
exactly. And like as a primal disruption. And so like at the end, what is funny in the last scene of the movie is that you do have these terrorists that are a bit of a disrupting dark shadow force that keep wanting to prevent the bourgeois to enjoy himself. And at the end, they kill everybody except for the one guy who's hiding under the table. And what really kind of betrays him is him going with his hand grabbing for, you know, the piece of the meat, like his urgent need for satisfying that oral fixation kind of betrays him and kills him. But basically, I feel like the film is so interesting because it's all these inner tensions. All the characters represent own personal, one person's, you know, his tensions within himself.
Yes.
All these characters, whether it's the priest, whether it's the ambassador, the cops, it's all these, you know, we all have a cop in our own heads, I all have a priest in our own heads, telling all these voices that are within us. And that's what I really like about the movie. And I think I try to emulate a bit in my work.
Oh my goodness, that is so illuminating. I love that you've connected it to almost like the super ego function, you know, the kind of, as you say, the cop in your head. And to me, this kitchen counter is kind of mesmerizing because it does, it sort of coalesces a lot of different tensions in one painting of the need to, you know, eat and survive. But within that, there's this kind of other dimension that threatens to just overflow, and there's different signs of violence or danger present in the film and in your picture, which are kind of very subtle. They're very subtly portrayed. They're like in the corners, like the dog's snarl and the chef's knife being just ever so slightly like lifted up. So I find that often in your paintings, that's the verge, you know, the cliff edge of an impulse fully blowing up that is represented. And I really like that kind of tension. It makes it feel so alive and dynamic. So I'm going to play the clip now from The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie. This is the clip that we both agreed would be great, which is iconic scene of them attempting yet again to dine together and some very peculiar things are happening. And then if you have any further thoughts, you can share them after the clip.
Simone, sembra déjà jamais tenté d'aller dans un ashram ainsi que quelques zen. C'est une congrégation religieuse. Les gens vont dire. C'est cher. Ça coûte rien. Là, on fait la méditation. Mais là-bas, il y a le temps. C'est pas cher du tout. Et la nourriture, très très bonne, très saine. Accompagné.
Qu'est-ce que c'est que cette plaisanterie?
Invité à dîner avec vous le spectre du commandeur.
Et pour montrer votre valeur, vous avez invité à dîner avec vous.
Et pour faire croire qu'il avait assisté à ce banquet,
Mon Dieu, mais qu'est-ce que je fais ici, moi?
vous nous avez endormis avec un narcotique.
Je ne connais pas le texte.
Yeah, so I just, this is so wonderful. It has so many different angles to it, but what really strikes me is that, you know, the ostensible goal of getting together and having a meal is proved to be fraudulent because the chicken is made of rubber. And then he is publicly humiliated in front of an audience, and he's made a spectacle. And this becomes the real impulse or desire that he fears. And it's kind of tied up with the food element, the food fixation, the oral fixation. And I feel like Kitchen Counter and this scene are kind of like, it's like a marriage made in heaven. They're perfect together.
Yes. Yeah, and it's really like the fact it's the whole movie basically is a dream within a dream within a dream within a dream, which is like absolutely perfect when you talk about unconscious, and it's especially collective unconscious, that people basically sharing and being onto the same, you know, on the same ride, like being in the same dream.
Absolutely. It's wonderful. So let's move on to the double, the final segment of this talk. I feel like time is flying by and I could just talk to you for hours and hours more. But I want to just say a few things about the double before I show images of your paintings in connection with this. The double is thought of as a way of representing the persecution of the ego by its doppelganger, revealing a splitting of the original personality. The doppelganger acts as a precursor to or metaphor of the opposition that the person experiences internally. It's just a very convenient way of representing the splitting going on inside. Often it kind of indicates an involuntary return to the same situation and sort of continually retracing one's steps, you know, going around in circles, which creates a kind of, you know, the eeriness that we attach to the uncanny. And the double really reveals the impulse to articulate the paradoxical experience of feeling like a stranger to oneself. And the concept of the double, I've noticed, you know, really figures largely and strongly in your work, namely States of Mind and Ghost. We're seeing Ghost on the screen right now. And it reveals kind of this strange paradoxical dimension of the double. And we thought that Vertigo illustrates this uncanny splitting that takes place. And I wondered what your thoughts were on this.
Yes, the double is something that's recurring again and again in my work. The double or the doppelganger, or the duality, or So, and often there's sometimes a third element, like in this painting, it'd be in ghost painting, it'd be the person, their reflection in the mirror, and then this ghostly projection right in the back. And whether that, so the idea of the doppelganger and the uncanny is the idea of one wouldn't, there's a part of oneself that is always alien or a stranger to your, to yourself. And that would be, and that's the experience in the mirror that's reflecting basically this experience. The reflection is always deceiving. And so the movie Vertigo, I watched again yesterday evening, and it's insane the amount of dualities, of doubling. For instance, like you have the main, Madeline is this woman. So there'd be like talking about duplicity and duality within oneself. Like Hitchcock is a master at duplicity, and is basically the whole movie. And we talked about that. Even the structure of the movie is doubled. There's a first part with Madeleine, and the second part was Judy, and this guy's infatuation for Madeleine was basically a construct. So it's also a movie about anima and projection, and about a lot of these, the love dynamics. But I guess for the movie, I'm more interested in the duality of that female character, who was always a bit of an enigma, and Hitchcock is great at creating these enigmatic characters. And often I like to represent these enigmatic characters, these secretive women who are faceless, but also, hard to puzzle, who are also fragmented in their, their representation on the screen. It's always a hand of them. It's like they always are puzzles to piece together. And that's partly like the main character, Johnny, is his own. It's why he falls completely in love with that, is because she's a sphinx to him, and he wants to solve the problem, and that's a special kind of anima, I'd say, which is female archetype. But yeah, so there's Madeleine and the real Madeleine. There's Madeleine and Judy. There's Madeleine and Marge, and there's Madeleine and Carlotta. So there's like all these duality within one single personality. So there's so many things to say about Vertigo and the use of the frames and the use of colors. I don't know even where I could start. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what you said about the varying perceptions, and projections that can take place. For me, this really was more connected to this other painting of yours, States of Mind, where two people can be in the same room together, ostensibly, connecting in the same conversation. And yet, as we see in your painting here, the device that they're wearing on their head, whether that's like blinders or VR sets, virtual reality sets, that is actually obstructing their potential to fully connect, because they're always engaged in their own fantasies of the other person. Mm-hmm. So there's different layers of connectivity, and I feel like that's definitely what's going on in Vertigo as well. Falling in love with someone new, but you're bringing the excess baggage of someone else that they remind you of, and you're kind of projecting all of that stuff onto them. So it's kind of a very, very confusing game.
It's confusing game. It's almost like Johnny fell in love with a construct at first, and then he fell in love with this projection of a woman, and then of course any relationship based of projection is bound to fail. That's what happens in the first, halfway into the movie. And then he finds a woman who is so close to his first love. He's trying to fashion her. I mean, I'm just doing like the psychological interpretation of the movie, real meaning, but it's like the second woman is going to try to fashion her to the image of the first woman he was infatuated with. And that again fails. And a lot of it is based on the fact that he actually prefers the fantasy version of the woman rather than the real woman herself. And in that second painting with the VR, I think the VR, whether it's new technology or whether it's real life where we actually do that ourselves, we don't even need VR to project onto another person. But I think the technology definitely has that potential to exacerbate this kind of problematic, that's also based on not really understanding yourself or not being really aware. And that's why in this painting, you see these two women having an argument and it looks like they're in the same space, but they're not. But also the shadow, and that's it's another archetype, Jungian archetype, which is the shadow of yourself is projecting onto the other one. And you have this kind of like,
it's wonderful. It's wonderful. I mean, seeing it like this on the screen will not do it justice. I implore all people who are UK based to go to the White Cube and see this in person, because it is absolutely breathtaking. It is like a cinematic experience. I'm going to play the final clip before we finish today. And this is from Vertigo. So this is when the detective actually follows this mystery woman in a museum, as it were. So it's a good place to finish. We've come full circle to the museum. And he's hired to investigate the strange activities of an old friend's wife. And, this is the beginning of his obsession with her. And it seems like she's also obsessed with something else that she seems to be gazing upon. So I'll just play that clip now.
Tell me something, that lady sitting in there, who's the woman in the painting she's looking at?
Oh, that's Carlotta. You'll find it in the catalog. Portrait of Carlotta.
May I have it?
Yes.
Thank you.
So I'm just aware that we've gone 3 minutes over time.
Oh my God.
So, but that's not as bad as I thought. You have so much to say. But did you have anything else to say before we finish off? I think there's a few questions that have come in as well.
Maybe we could go to the
questions. Yeah, that's a great idea. So, by the way, please follow us on Instagram. I've put all of our Instagram handles there on the screen. And let's have a look at some questions. So someone anonymous has said, you mentioned duality, repetition, and reflection in relation to the concepts of the double, but I would add duplicity, mimicry, the sense of looking at something and all not being as it originally seems. Could you comment on that in your work, Julie?
Yes, that would be, duplicity. Or simulacra, or like, I think of this idea of things are on the surface and not what they are on the inside is also often coming back in my work. Like for instance, in the sculptures where, for instance, at the show at White Cube, I'm working on fake food with the Japanese fake food. So this idea of mimicking or mimesis, but the stuff is not made out of what it seems is kind of big in my work.
Fantastic, yes. Fantastic. Got another question here from the chat. Have you ever watched the Cronenberg film Dead Ringers, as it also deals with twinning?
Oh, here I'm writing it down. I have a terrible memory, so I might have a Villa Cronenberg, and often think about always like his special effects are so good because they have this really uncanny, it's like uncanny valley, and I've always been inspired visually by his world. Yeah, I will check it out. Thank you.
Well, this question actually reminds me of the fact that I should mention the podcast that I co-host. Currently, we're actually doing a whole series on The Double, and we cover Dead Ringers. Right. So for those of you who want to check it out, it's Projections Podcast. I think we've covered in episode 1 of our new series. So another question for you, Julie. Your sculpture maize meal in the exhibition echoes Japanese sampuru, imitation food. What role do you think these play in Japanese society?
Oh, wow, that's an interesting question. Yeah, because it's what is the role of those things in Japanese society? Japanese are obsessed with, well, the amazing craft, they have an amazing craftsmanship. Beyond the purely utilitarian function of those objects, I've never thought about what they meant. What do you think, Mary? Help me here, because I know it's an interesting question, because I suspect there is actually a role for these things in Japanese society. Yeah. But the Japanese society is pretty orally fixated in general. I mean, movies like Tampopo and all that, it comes through so many movies that there's a displacement in Asian culture in general, and I'm half Vietnamese, from food to emotions. Food is often used to express, affection or like care, caring for the other, and often comes from society that was where a bit, that had promised, scarcity, and so I think the whole thing with food in Japanese society definitely reveals reveals something about the withholding of emotion, but communicating through another funnel, such as food. Mm-hmm.
But also the presentation of it in a certain way that it becomes like a kind of like a sublime object. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of like sushi rolls or other very kind of iconic objects that are like bite-sized, and you can very clearly see them as like a unique entity, like a self-contained entity, not necessarily connected to other objects on a plate. And
the bento boxes is like everything is in its box, which is very, like, in a way, very Japanese. We need to, like, a need for an urge for controlling, and Japanese society is extremely controlled in certain ways. Yes. But also the elevation of food to the status of fetish in Japanese society is huge. So that could be.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. Yeah. I'm just searching for other questions at this time. I'm not seeing any others coming through. Someone just has said, Kathy Lomax says, I am fascinated by Julie's sculpture, Maryland Sushi. I guess this connects again with the oral, but you can say more about it.
Yes, when I came back I lived in Japan for a year, and then I came back again for a residency just very, very recently. And I wanted to do some, work that's really specific to Japan. I just didn't want to go there and do what I usually do in America. So I started to think of those sculptures, and yes, I think, we talked about oral fixation in my work, and my dad is an amazing cook. And I think the place of food in my childhood is immense, is huge. It's an art form. There's so many things that are projected onto food, and but also something about being overly fed, and things being displaced and things turning onto themselves. And I think there's, I think the repulsion when when you discover on the sushi, it's actually, they're like a beautiful pair of lips on a sushi. It's this kind of, the food that looks back at you. There's this really uncanny moment, and that's definitely a play on that. And the beauty marks was kind of an afterthought, I guess, for those, and then making the plate and the double, and it's very, very intuitive, the process, and I'm not sure if there's a specific story about it other than that.
Thank you so much, Julie. I'm just going to check with Susanna. Is it, how are we doing for time?
I think that was our last question, unless any others have come through to you. I hate to stop you because I feel like it's been such a pleasure to sit in on this conversation, which I know will carry on and could carry on much longer. It's such a fascinating intersection of your different, knowledge and disciplines. But really, I just wanted to thank you so much for letting us listen to you. I feel like we're going away not only with new insights into the paintings, but also with a watch list to explore, over the coming weeks. And it just remains to remind people that you can book to see Julie's exhibition at White Cube at whitecube.com, where you can also find more information about the book. Thank you both very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you so much, Susanna.
Bye.
From New York.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you for tuning in.